Hi and welcome to Viewmaster Travels. My name's Dave and it's my goal to visit all the locations from my vintage 3D Viewmaster reels. Today it's Washington D.C. Did you know that Washington D.C. is more than just our nation's capital? It's a hidden map of Masonic secrets, astronomical wonders, as well as home to the nation's oldest and most important national monument. The story of Washington, D.C. begins in 1783. At the time, the federal government was mobile, meeting in various cities as needed, and this year they were in Philadelphia. On June 20th, a mob of unpaid Revolutionary War soldiers began protesting outside Independence Hall, preventing the delegates from leaving. Alexander Hamilton asked the state to help, but he was refused, and George Washington had to send troops to suppress the mutiny. They realized that the federal government would need their own place to meet, separate from any state in the Union, so they wrote that into the Constitution, that a 100-square-mile federal district would be created out of state land. George Washington wanted it to be close to his home on the Potomac River and to include the ports of Alexandria and Georgetown, so he picked a point to be the southernmost corner of a 10 by 10 mile diamond that would enclose the new district. Thomas Jefferson then sent Andrew Ellicott, Geographer General of the United States, to mark out the exact points making up the borders of the new district. Ellicott brought Benjamin Banneker, an African-American naturalist, mathematician, and astronomer, to help. Why would an astronomer be crucial to mapping out the borders of the new district? Here's the tangent. Banneker needed to figure out exactly where Washington's point was on the globe, and the problem was longitude, or position east or west of a prime meridian. To find this, he used the moons of Jupiter. How? Well, when Galileo first observed Jupiter's moons, he saw them moving like the pendulum of a great cosmic clock, enabling astronomers to precisely predict their future positions and record these in almanacs. Banneker would observe Jupiter each night and write down the exact time when one of its moons would disappear into Jupiter's shadow. He'd look that event up in his almanac, which told him what time you'd see that same event happen if you were in the Greenwich Observatory. Comparing his local time with the Greenwich time for the same event, he could figure out how far around the globe Greenwich must be, giving him his longitude west of the Greenwich Meridian. That's why you need an astronomer. With the location secured, Washington now had to plan the city itself, so he asked Revolutionary War artist, architect, and fellow Freemason Pierre Charles L'Enfant to plan out the new city. L'Enfant explored the area. He was looking for a prominent place to put the new seat of government, so he started his design by putting the Capitol building on Jenkins Hill over here. This new Capitol building would be the center of the new city. Next, the new nation's president would need a house, and it would need a nice view. L'Enfant picked a spot here, uphill from the river inlet, with a view not unlike Washington's Mount Vernon. He drew a line between them and decided it would be a grand avenue, the longest separation between primary government buildings of any city he knew. He divided the city into quadrants, with the Capitol at the center, and laid out a grid of roads. He then added a few roads parallel to his grand avenue, and where those roads intersected he planned parks and public features. And here's our first Masonic geometry. Using the Capitol and President's House as vertices, L'Enfant drew a right triangle here. On this corner, he wanted to put a monument of George Washington on a horse, and he filled in this long side of the triangle with a grand garden. The right triangle and the square within it are fundamental symbols in Freemasonry. It was so important to put Washington's monument in this exact location, they were willing to drain this swampland and convert this river into a canal to do so. With the plan in place, the government started purchasing the required lands from the locals and cleared the way for the new streets. Unfortunately, L'Enfant got a bit carried away with this. He was so insistent that his geometry be adhered to that he tore down a house that stood in his way without permission. Turned out it belonged to his boss, Daniel Carroll of Duddington, and L'Enfant got fired from the project. But it was L'Enfant's grand vision that gives DC so many beautiful views. Was he merely an architect, or was he crafting a legacy? Washington Monument shimmers in reflecting pool. This famous view of the Washington Monument wasn't always possible. Here's a map of the city from 1836, and if you look here, you can see that the statue of Washington on a horse never happened. In fact, where the monument is today is half water still, the inlet for the canal. In 1833, a group of citizens decided to finally build a monument to Washington where L'Enfant had wanted one. So they formed the Washington National Monument Society, began raising money, and had a contest to pick a new design. The Washington on horseback idea didn't seem grand enough now that Washington was dead. They settled on this enormous obelisk with a complex temple at the base, which at least included a statue with horses, although they eventually simplified this design to keep the price down. Problem was that the corner of the right triangle between the White House and the Capitol was still in the marsh and too soft to build on, so they ended up building the monument 390 feet off target. Construction of the Washington Monument went pretty well for a while, but you can see if you look that there's a change in the stones used about halfway up. You're usually told that this was because construction stopped during the Civil War, but that isn't the whole story. As they were building the monument, the society would receive stones donated from various organizations that would be embedded in the walls inside the obelisk. In 1854, they received a stone made of African marble, taken from the Temple of Concord in Rome. It was a gift from the Pope himself and had Rome to America carved in it. In the middle of the night, on the 6th of March, members of an anti-Catholic political party named the Know Nothings broke into the lapidarium where the Pope stone was stored, stole it, smashed it, and dumped it in the river. They then took control of the Monument Society and construction stopped, so construction had already stopped when the Civil War broke out a few years later. A reward was offered for the Pope stone, but it wasn't returned. It was eventually found by a diver in 1892, but disappeared a few days later, only to turn up 60 years after that as a donation to the Smithsonian, who displayed it for a few years. Now, though, it's likely in their warehouse, protected by top men. After the Civil War, Congress took control of the building project and construction started again using a different source of stones, and the monument was finished in 1888. Here's another Freemason connection. The cornerstone was placed with a Masonic ceremony in 1848, and it's hollow and contains all kinds of artifacts. The very top of the monument has a small, solid aluminum pyramid attached, which was, at the time, worth more than its weight in silver. It's by far the tallest structure in D.C. You can see it from almost everywhere, so it makes a great navigational landmark, even if it is a few hundred feet off. White House from top of Washington Monument. So, full disclosure here, I didn't realize until we were in DC looking at these Viewmaster pictures that the Washington Monument was hollow and that you could go to the top of it. Unfortunately, tickets to ride to the top sell out quickly and we couldn't get any. The Viewmaster picture is looking north at the White House, but what caught my attention was this big elliptical playing field. Looks like baseball and rugby. Walking around, we did find the area, called appropriately the Ellipse, but we couldn't find any baseball fields. The Ellipse does hide some secrets, though. This area was the President's Park, planned between the President's Mansion and the waterfront. Here's an 1853 map marking the incomplete Washington Monument, still showing a blank space here. And here in 1897, the area's been graded with the elliptical pathway. I wanted to see when the playing fields were added, so I started going through USGS maps from around that time. They're not there, but this strange symbol appears in the middle of the ellipse. According to this guide to topographic map symbols, that's a marker for a third-order horizontal control with elevation, whatever that is. But I don't see anything in the Viewmaster picture, and we didn't see anything walking around, so what is that? A horizontal control point is a bronze marker used as a fixed reference to measure your east-west longitude, but why would there be one here? Thinking back, I realized this point is right on the line of L'Enfant's Masonic Square, right in line with the White House and the street circles to the north. Was that just a coincidence? Then I found a paper written by mathematician Clark Kimberling named The Shape and History of the Ellipse in Washington, D.C. He asked the USGS about this strange mark on the map and got this answer. It's a benchmark, but not one of ours. At first we didn't know what it was, but it has a name, the Meridian Stone. Digging further, I found an old USGS database and typed Meridian Stone into the search, and it returned one line. Clicking that link gave me something amazing. Looks like a marker was put there in 1890, described in 1921, at Washington, north of the Washington Monument, south of the White House, at the center of the ellipse, and at the Meridian Stone, marked U.S. Meridian 1890. Okay, so what's that? To answer that, we have to follow a line south from the center of the White House, through the Meridian Stone, to this, the Jefferson Pier. This stone marker is just west of the Washington Monument. It replaced a wooden post that was on the river's edge that people used to tie up their boats. But it's not named a pier because of that. No one knew it then, but their wooden mooring post was actually a surveyor's pier, another map benchmark, installed by Thomas Jefferson. In 1804, he asked surveyor Isaac Briggs to mark these points, calling this line the true meridian, but no one knows why. I think he was trying to accurately determine where the statue of Washington on a horse should go, which means the Jefferson Pier Stone sits in the exact location L'Enfant intended to be the corner of his Masonic Square. If we keep following Jefferson's meridian line, what do we find? Jefferson Memorial at cherry blossom time. The Jefferson Memorial is on Jefferson's meridian line, as far south of his pyre as the White House is north of it, forming another triangle. However, from our old maps, this point on the triangle used to be in the river. In the 1870s, tunnels were being dug under DuPont Circle up here, and that landfill was moved south to fill in some of the Potomac River, initially to support a new railroad bridge with the intention of adding a lot more public parkland, as you can see on this 1897 map. It also allowed for the creation of a very clever tidal basin, this artificial lake here. This lake has two sets of one-way gates. The southern pair only allowed water into the basin as the tide rose. When the tide went out, it was forced through the eastern gates into the Washington Channel, which flushed the channel of silt. The inlet was equipped with 4 liquid chlorine dispensers in the arches of the inlet bridge. This was to clean the water for a bathing beach. DC's beach was very popular in the humid summers. They'd host beauty contests and diving competitions, but like we saw in St. Pete, the beach was for white people only. Instead of integrating the beach or even building a segregated beach, Congress voted to shut the beach down entirely in 1925. The ornamental cherry trees have been a traditional gift from Japan starting in 1912, predating the memorial that sits among them by over 30 years. The annual Cherry Blossom Festival is a major tourist draw, and that's when we were visiting as well. It really is quite a sight to get the views of the memorials framed in the cherry blossoms. The Jefferson Memorial was built on the site of the old bathing beach between 1939 and 1943. It's a beautiful temple with a domed roof and great views of the other monuments. And from here, we followed the hypotenuse of another triangle created by the reclaimed land to our last stop, Lincoln Memorial. This is one of the few monuments that's changed slightly since the Viewmaster picture was taken. The reflecting pool was reconstructed in 2009. It was originally filled using the city's drinking water and leaked 500,000 gallons of water per week. Now they use water from the Tidal Basin, which is refreshed by the tides. Lincoln was assassinated in 1865, and since Ford's Theater was demolished and then collapsed, there was no appropriate memorial to him. At that time, people were frustrated with DC's lack of development. The city still had dirt roads and lacked basic sanitation. Charles Dickens called it the City of Magnificent Intentions. In 1901, a new commission was formed to bring DC into the 20th century, expanding on L'Enfant's plan with what became known as the McMillan Plan. This was heavily based on the City Beautiful movement popularized during the Chicago World's Fair of 1893. Using this plan, the Fine Arts Council voted unanimously to build the Lincoln Memorial in line with the Washington Monument and the Capitol. Once everything was agreed, construction began in 1914 and was completed in 1922. But did you ever look closely at Lincoln's hands? They contain a secret. Lincoln's statue was sculpted by Daniel Chester French, whose son was deaf and attended a school for the deaf. The school's president, Edward Gallaudet, asked French to create a statue of his father, Thomas Gallaudet, who had founded the school. The statue shows Gallaudet teaching a young student sign language. It's on the campus of Gallaudet University, which was funded by Abraham Lincoln, so the sculptor of the Lincoln Memorial statue had a deep connection with American Sign Language, and if you look closely, you can see that he carved Lincoln's hands to subtly sign A and L. And did you know there's a secret chamber underneath? In the 1970s, you could take a special tour of the memorial's Undercroft, an enormous space beneath the entire monument. The tours ended when someone noticed asbestos in the walls. However, if you could take the tour, you'd see all kinds of graffiti left by the original builders of the monument. This guy's a popular character named Mutt from the Mutt and Jeff comics, which was the first daily comic strip originally published in 1907. Looking back at the monuments we visited and considering the Masonic influence on its design, something does occur to me. The White House, Capitol, Jefferson, and Lincoln monuments are arranged as cardinal points around the Washington Monument. Could this represent the layout of a Masonic lodge? According to this 1826 book on Masonry, a Masonic lodge is an oblong square oriented east to west, as is the Memorial Park. In a Masonic lodge, the east, representing the sun, the source of light and wisdom, is the station of the worshipful master, the highest elected officer in the lodge. On the map, this would be represented by the Capitol. Was Congress considered the source of light and wisdom? The south is the station of the junior warden. This position represents the sun at its meridian, and if you look south during the fall equinox, the sun passes perfectly over the Jefferson Memorial's domed roof. Is that a coincidence? The west, the station of the senior warden, marks the setting sun and the closing of the day. This is where the Lincoln Memorial is, and this position seems fitting for a president so tragically lost. And the north represents a place of darkness. This is where the White House is. I wonder what the president would think of that. In the lodge, these stations surround an altar, but on the map, the Washington Monument isn't actually in line with them. But the Jefferson Pyre is, exactly, and it looks more like an altar to me. Now here's what I find really interesting. In the York rite, the altar should be placed in the center of the room, or more properly, a little to the east of the center, which is exactly where the Washington Monument is. Is this why Washington, L'Enfant, Jefferson, and the McMillan Commission went to such great lengths, draining the swamp, containing the river, and reclaiming the land, to ensure these monuments were placed where they are? So, which is the oldest federal monument? Well, it's none of these. To find the oldest monument, we took the metro down to Alexandria and hiked out to Jones Point Lighthouse. This is the place Washington selected to be the southern point of the district diamond, and here, in front of the lighthouse building, hidden behind the seawall, is the oldest federal monument in the entire United States. This is the original boundary stone placed by George Washington on April 15, 1791, to mark the southern point of the federal district. It was placed with a Masonic ceremony. This same ceremony was used to lay the cornerstones of the Capitol, the White House, and the other monuments. The fact that the Freemasons performed this important ceremony on this small rock means that they considered this boundary marker to be a cornerstone, the fundamental foundation of a new building, or in this case, the foundation of a new government. This small stone is the first federal monument in the United States, and perhaps the most important one.